Hi, Christine. It's really good to see you again. Welcome back.
Thanks for having me again.
So, we're bringing you back onto Pilipinx and Wellness just for one follow up question brought up by our social media strategist, Kathleen Torio. And I think it's a good question to ask. So, she was wondering after listening to the episode, what does spiritual healing entail, and what does that look like within your practice?
Yeah. I think it's a challenge for a lot of my clients because um, it's not something that a whole lot of therapists will inquire about. We're trained to kind of look at all aspects of diversity, but as a whole, therapists and psychologists tend to be the least spiritual or religious of all the careers. And so it may not be something that is easily, at the front of our minds when we're assessing for intersectionality factors, when we're assessing for components of diversity that are contributing to someone's distress. So, there's a couple of ways we can look at this. When it comes to spiritual healing, from a clinical psychology perspective, I make sure that I'm curious about it. I don't ever want to assume that that is part of what is bringing someone to therapy. But if it's something that the client continues to bring up, or they might reference it, like one of my clients who's trying to come out, but they were raised Catholic, and so what does that mean? What are the messages that they receive? Because even though we may know it as a general whole, I want to know exactly what that client experienced, the messages they received, and what kind of distress it's causing. So I want to be very specific. I've had clients from different religions, like people who identify as Jehovah Witness, and they'll bring it up every single session. So I know that we're going to be talking about that, or people who were formerly Church of Latter Day Saints, and reconciling, oh, this was my identity before, it's now not. But then there's so many aspects of that still contribute to their thoughts about themselves, their beliefs about the world, and are not in alignment. So one aspect of spiritual healing is actually looking at spirituality and religion as, part of somebody's identity, and how do they want to incorporate that and work on that in therapy. The second component of it, because religion and spirituality are very different. So, religion we think of more as a structured format, and spirituality, which a lot of people do, they're like, I identify as spiritual. I'm like, okay. So the curiosity of asking, what does that mean, is really important, because then I can get a sense of their values. I can get a sense of how they see the world and themselves and others. And if I'm familiar, at least, with, some of the world religions from which, we associate with like overall spirituality, like Taoism or Buddhism, um, then it becomes a matter of, okay, where's the distress coming from? Are you acting in alignment with your values that you you that you hold to, identifying as spiritual? And so being open to having that conversation and exploring it, versus me pretending to be the expert on anything, because I'm not. Just because I was raised Catholic doesn't mean I'm going to completely understand somebody's upbringing in the Catholic faith and how they understand their values. So the second component, I think, for me, of spiritual healing is um, letting it be, whereas before it might be a factor, this could be a coping strategy. It's like, well, you know, how can we think about this in a way that's aligned with your values? How can we engage or create new behaviors that helps you be congruent? And just being open to having that conversation without expecting that I'm going to be the expert on it. And I am aware that this is super vague, because there is not anything, at least in my program or most programs, that tell us how to work with somebody from a spiritual or religious perspective. And I don't know if I mentioned this before, but I do have a master's in spiritual psychology. And what I really appreciated about that education is that I did it after my doctorate and I relearned all of my skills from a spiritual perspective, which for the purposes of that program, it was about seeing the loving in each person and like with the intention, working with the intention of helping them see that in themselves. And healing in that context is the application of loving to the parts inside that hurt. So that to me is spiritual healing, whether it's like me showing care and loving for the person in front of me who is having a difficult time or struggling, but also incorporating their own wisdom and awareness of how spirituality or religion um, is, is affecting them, whether it's a method of healing or whether it might be a factor that they're trying to make sense of that's causing distress. But there's no cookie cutter way to do that. I've just been kind of incorporating this for the last 13 years or so. And I remember when I first got this spiritual degree, I'm like, there's no way that I can incorporate this approach because this is so opposite of what I learned in my clinical program. And
Yeah.
I struggled with that as part of my therapist identity. But now that I've been doing it for some time, I realized it was about helping me be my authentic self by helping me work on my own stuff while I was helping others with their stuff from this perspective of just really caring genuinely for the person in front of me because they're a human being and they are deserving of health and well-being. So yeah, I don't know that I'm an expert in it, but I do think that the advantage of having a spiritual approach, even though I don't like flat out say it to them, I'm going to work on a spiritual approach with you. No, but it's about transparency, it's about authenticity, and it's about like pure empathy and really being able to convey genuine care and concern for my clients. And it seems to work, especially with a lot of my young adult clients who may not have had that experience yet in their lives. So I hope that it explains it. It's a really great follow-up question. I think you and I got so excited about
Yeah.
like all of these different aspects of Filipinx culture that I'm glad that we got this little separate part to explore what spiritual healing is.
Yeah, no, thank you, Christine. It sounds
Yeah.
like it's very client-centered, and
Yes.
definitely the client walks you through what their definition of spirituality means
Yeah.
to them, right? And you're
Yeah.
definitely there to guide them through the process in whatever they're
Mhm.
seeking in your session.
Yeah, because they're the expert on them. From session one, I'm like, you are the expert on you. You have your own wisdom. I just have a bunch of degrees and experience and things like that. But religion and spirituality is going to be part of that wisdom, and very much so when it comes to, again, the way that they see themselves and the way that they interact with the world. So I think we clinicians need to do a better job at really acknowledging and asking questions about whether a faith tradition or spirituality may be um, part of the presenting concern.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Dr. Christine Catipon, for coming back on to answer that question from our social media strategist, Kathleen Torrio. We hope this also answers that lingering question if some of you in our community had that same question. And we can't wait to see where things unfold for you.
Thank you so much.